If you're struggling with formulas in Airtable, you don't want to miss this video. I'm going to be going into detail about the differences between if statements, nested if statements, and a switch formula. So if that's of interest, stick around and let's get into it. Hey, I'm Gareth Pronovost. I am the owner at Gap Consulting, where we help you to organize and automate your business and life. If that's of interest and you want to learn more about how we do that, check out our website. I'll include links below. And don't miss our free Airtable crash course. It will help get you up to speed quickly with Airtable software. But that being said, let's just jump into the heart of today's video, and it is all about formulas. So I'm going to be writing formulas here on the fly and sharing some of my pro tips. Specifically, we are going to be looking at if statements and the switch statement. These are two different types of formulas, but they're often very similar in the way that we use them and the results that they produce. So let's take a look. I've got a really simple task list here, nothing complicated. I just want some, fake data here so that I can run some, formulas off of this. So really, I've just got the name of the different tasks, and I've got a status here. And let's say I also have like a complete checkbox, because that's a pretty standard thing to include with any kind of task list, right? So inside of this, then basically we're just saying, hey, this status can be one of three things. This, by the way, is the default listing that comes anytime you start a new table from scratch. So I just took the default that Airtable provides for us, and we're just going to run with that. And so I want to write a formula that's looking at this status and is producing some kind of an output. So maybe, for example, if actually let's add some more complexity to here, and I'm going to say there's a date for these things, and maybe there's a date due, right? So today, at the actual day and time of recording here, it is October 8th. So I'm going to go ahead and pull some of these that are before the 8th, and then some of them that are after the 8th, just so that we can run some scenarios around that date. So an if statement would be as follows. I'll just use if here, and then we go into our formula. We tell it that we want the field type of formula. And first, of course, we should decide what we're going to write. So maybe something like, if the box is checked that the task is complete, then we want to output completed. And if it's not complete, then we want to output incomplete, right? So this is a pretty simple if statement. It uses what we call a Boolean value. So if we're looking at something, and if it's true, then yes, this output will happen. And if it's not true, then no, and then this other output will happen. That is the basic syntax of an if statement. In order to start writing an if statement, just write if with an open and closed parenthesis. And inside of here, once you click between those parentheses, you'll notice up here that in this like yellowish box that there is a syntax guide for us. If you're new to writing formulas, pay attention to this syntax guide. It is going to give you all the information you need to know in order to get your formula up to speed. So you'll notice that the first part is a logical input. Then after the comma, then we have value 1, and then another comma and value 2. So if you read the text here, it says it's returning value 1 if the logical argument is true, otherwise it returns value 2. So in this case, there's an example. If sales are greater than 50, then it's a win, otherwise it's going to output lose. So in our example, same thing, right? We're just saying, hey, if that box is checked, then completed, and otherwise we'll say incomplete. So that's fairly straightforward. We are going to first reference that completed field that is right here. So I'm saying if complete, so if complete equals 1, or if complete, then we are going to output completed. Otherwise, we are going to output incomplete. So this is how our syntax looks. Now, quick side note, we can add spaces in here if we want to. It's not going to impact the way that the formula reads. So if it's a little easier for you to visualize what is happening in here by spacing it out, feel free to do so. So really what we're saying is, if this complete field is marked, or if it's checked, then we're going to output completed, otherwise incomplete. And so if we save this formula, You'll see obviously all of these are incomplete because nothing is yet checked. We can see if the formula is actually working by making sure to check a couple boxes. And of course, we get this nice output. So that's great. But in this case, not only do we have this complete checkbox, but we also have a done status. So there are occasions where you might say, well, maybe I didn't check the box for some reason, but I changed the status to done. And so filing taxes, this task, should be complete. So now our statement is not sufficient the way we wrote it. Because essentially what we're saying is we have multiple conditions that could drive us to the fact that our task is complete. It could be that the box is checked, or it could be that the status is marked as done, or maybe there are some other. And so in this example, we can build a nested if statement. Alternatively, we could use an or statement inside of the logic function. I'm going to highlight both of these for us. And my first big tip for formula writing, especially if you're newer to formulas or you don't feel super comfortable with them, my biggest tip is break it up into pieces. I've already written my if statement for Checkbox, and it's working perfectly. So rather than trying to build on this and making things overly complicated all at once, I find it very advantageous to break it up into smaller pieces. So we've got our checkbox working great. Let's build the if statement for the status is done. So we're going to, again, choose the formula field type. And in this case, we're going to, again, use the if statement. And once we're inside here, we have to perform our logical value, right? Or our logical statement. In this case, we're going to say if the status is equal to done. Quick pause. You might notice I'm using single quotes here. Earlier, I used double quotations to output. Single quotes or double quotes doesn't make a difference in Airtable. The syntax is going to pick them up either way, so long as you're consistent within that particular piece. So if I used a single quote and then tried to close it with a double quote, that breaks. So you just be consistent within that. So, but in this case, I'm saying, hey, I'm checking this logical formula. If the status is done, then, so comma, what's our first thing going to be? Well, then we're going to output completed. And if it's not done, then we're going to output incomplete. Right? And so now we have a nice little formula that's working, looking specifically at that status. So taking this a step further, we can then nest these if statements, or, comma, alternatively, we can write an or statement to get this working the way we intend. So let's take a look at what the first alternative would be, a nested if statement. This is where we use two or more if statements inside of one another, so we check multiple logical values depending on how it goes. So in this case, I will start with my first if statement. I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to write a new one. This will be my nested if. And I'm going to paste what I just copied, right? So again, this is working fine for just that complete checkbox. If complete is checked, then output completed. Otherwise, output incomplete. And that's working just great. So in order to add that next step, I need to say, well, if complete is checked, then I will output completed. However, if it's not checked, then perhaps I need to check the status column to see if it's marked done, because if it is, then I still need to mark it as completed. So prior to running this part of the formula, we want to actually run another if statement. And so what we're going to do is now bring in our if statement from the other one. So I'm saying, the way that logically this works, the way the formula syntax works, it says if complete is checked, then I output completed. Otherwise, if it's not checked, then I'm going to check if something else is true and then have an output dependent on that. So this is what we call a nested if statement. My nested if is going to be that status is equal to done. So if that is true, then again, we want to output completed. And if it's not, incomplete. Now, quick tip. In order for us to output incomplete, that would mean that both of these logical arguments have to be false. That is, if complete is false, then we're going to not output completed here, and then we're going to check on this second if statement. If the status is equal to done, then we're going to output completed. But again, if it's false, if the second condition is false, then we will output incomplete. So if I go ahead and save this, this is now a nested if statement that is checking first for the checked box, and if the checked box is not marked, then it's checking to see the status, if the status is done, and if either of those conditions are met, then it outputs completed, and if they're not, then it outputs incomplete. Now, that is a nested if statement. These can go on indefinitely. You can nest many, many if statements within one another, and it can get very complicated. So as I said, breaking it up into pieces as I did here with first the checkbox and then the status is a pro tip that's going to help save you a lot of headache, especially if you're still relatively uncomfortable writing more complicated formulas. But let's talk about the switch formula. And what is it, and how is it different from if statements? The switch formula is a little unique in that it looks at a particular field and it establishes a pattern. Now that sounds a little crazy, but it's pretty straightforward. Again, just as with the if statement, if we write the formula out and then we observe the little yellowish box over here, we get some tips and tricks on how to use this formula. So in this case, it's looking at an expression and then comma, there's a pattern with a result, ... default. That might not make a ton of sense if you haven't used this formula a whole lot in the past, but I'll show you the most common way that I see the switch formula used. Let's say we wanted to look at the status, and if the status is to do, then we want to output get this done. And if the status is in progress, then we want to output hurry up and complete it, or something along those lines, right? If we were using if statements, we'd have to nest multiple if statements, and it would get quite complex. But the switch formula helps us write this in a much more succinct way. So I'm going to look at the status. Remember, that's my expression. So in this case, the first variable that I'm inputting here is my expression. So I'm saying look at status. And if the status is, so I put a comma, and now I'm saying to do. So if status is to do, I want to output this needs to get done. Again, these are in quotes, right? Because I'm looking at text. Now the next part is if it's in progress. Whoops, and I better remember what I just said and put it in quotes. If it's in progress, then I need to say hurry up and finish. And lastly, if it is done, then I want to output great work. And one other thing that I do want to point out, in this syntax bar over here, or in this little syntax helper, there is this square bracket with default here. I'm not going to use a default just yet, and I want to come back to exactly what that square bracket means. Essentially, though, it means that this is optional. So this square bracket is telling us this could go on for as long as you want it to. And this square bracket is telling us that there is the option of putting a default variable or a default output in this formula. Let's go ahead and set this up though. And what we're going to find is that now this formula is outputting whatever we told it to output inside of here based on the status that we've picked, right? So each status is associated with a certain output. So again, the syntax here, and this is the most common use case that we see for switch, is we're going to look at the status, and then if the output is to do in status, then we're going to output this. And if the input, I said output earlier, if the input is in progress for status, then output this. And if the input is done, then output this. Now let's talk about a default. We might have the possibility that a record is created without a status. And so we want to have something labeled here that alerts us. No status selected. So this is the default, and again, it is optional. So I'm going to go ahead and save this up, And if I create a new record without a status, you see that that instantly is reflected there. So hopefully that helps you to understand what the differences between the if and the switch statement is, and also wrap your head around how to put together a nested if. Any questions you do have, please post them below. Look forward to hearing from you, and I'll try to get to answering those as quickly as I can. As always, I hope you found that to be very helpful. If you did and you'd like to learn more, swing on by our website and check out all the resources we've put together. We have a free Airtable crash course that will get you up to speed quickly and easily in Airtable. And we also offer some paid services, including hourly consultations with our experts. We have some online group coaching programs and courses. And for the very advanced needs, we can build a bespoke project for you from scratch. So swing on by, and I look forward to connecting with you soon.